The chapel smelled like candle wax and floor polish. I had picked the seat the widow gave me, front row, on the aisle. I had a folded program in my hands. His name was printed on the front of it, and I had read the name 4 times, the way you do when a name has stopped meaning a person and started meaning a hole in the world. Then the colonel leaned down over me. He was in dress blues, silver eagles on the shoulders, a row of ribbons that told a career of good staff jobs and no bad days. He smelled like coffee and aftershave. He put one hand on the back of the pew, close to my shoulder, and he lowered his voice to the pitch men use when they think they are being kind. "Sweetheart," he said, "this section is for people who actually served with him. There is seating in the back." A few heads turned. Somewhere behind me, 2 rows back, somebody laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Worse than that. A small, comfortable laugh, the laugh of people agreeing that a mistake had been made and was being politely corrected. I did not answer him. I looked at the program in my hands. I want you to understand the exact shape of what he had just said, because it is the whole of the thing. He had told me, over the casket of Master Sergeant Roy Talley, that I had not served with Roy Talley, that I did not belong in the front of the room, that I had wandered into a grief that was not mine and taken a seat I had not earned. I had served with him. He was the reason I was alive to be told that I had not. But I did not say that. Not then. I have learned that there are rooms where the truth is better set down quietly and left to be found. In a chapel with an honor guard posted and a flag already folded in a soldier's white gloves is one of those rooms. So I kept my eyes on the program, and I let the colonel believe he was winning. At the far end of the room, by the casket, the sergeant of the guard was watching me. I did not know his name yet. I would learn it. What I saw in that first moment was a young non-commissioned officer in dress blues, white gloves, white cover under his arm, doing the still and formal work of standing watch over a dead man. And I saw his eyes come to me and stop. And I saw something move behind his face. Not confusion, the opposite of confusion. The look of a man who has just recognized something and is now working very hard to keep his face from saying so. That is where this starts. But it does not start there either. It starts on a road in another country 17 years ago, and it starts the night before, on a phone. Let me take you back. It matters more than the colonel does. I did not fly across the country to be a colonel that day. I flew to be a soldier that a man had trained. I want to be precise about that because it explains the suit. I was a lieutenant colonel, a battalion commander. I had a uniform with an oak leaf on it, and my name over the pocket and the kind of authority that makes rooms rearrange themselves when I walk in. I left all of it at home. I wore a plain dark suit, no lapel pin, nothing. Because Roy Talley did not save a lieutenant colonel. He saved a scared first lieutenant who had frozen, and I wanted to bury him as the person he had actually pulled out of the fire, not as the rank she had turned into afterward. The night before, I had worked the phone from a hotel room. I had helped arrange the honors detail. I did it quietly through the right channels, and when a very kind sergeant major on the other end realized who I was and started to offer me things, a better hotel, an escort, a reserved everything, I told him no. I told him I did not want anything that Roy would not have gotten on his own. I told him to give the detail to a good unit and let them do it right. And that was all I wanted. He said, "Yes, ma'am. He did it right. I will come back to how right." I dressed that morning in the hotel room, in the dark, out of habit, the way you dress before a hard day so that the day cannot catch you unready. I had brought 2 things, the dark suit and the service dress uniform, in case some part of me lost its nerve and wanted the armor of it. I stood and looked at both for a while. The uniform would have made everything easier. No one leans over an oak leaf and tells it to move to the back. But easier was not the point. Roy did not save a uniform. He saved a person, a scared and specific person, and I was going to bury him as her. I hung the uniform back in the closet, and I put on the suit, and I looked at myself in the mirror, a middle-aged woman in plain dark clothes with no rank and no story on her, exactly the way a stranger would see me, and I made my peace with being seen that way for one morning. I got to the chapel early. I watched the honor guard form up outside, the casket team walking through the sequence one last time in the cold, quiet, and exact. The way good soldiers rehearse a thing they have done 100 times because the 101st is the one that matters to a family. I did not know then that one of them was mine. I just watched them work and thought about how Roy would have inspected them and found one small thing wrong and fixed it without making anyone feel small, because that was his particular genius. At the chapel, Roy's widow found me before the service. Her name was Ruth. She had held that man together for 40 years, and she was holding herself together now the way the strong ones do, with her chin level and her hands very still. She took both of my hands. She said the thing that put me in that seat. "He would want you up front, Claire," she said. "You were his. Don't you dare sit in the back." So I sat in the front where she put me, and a colonel I had never met decided I had stolen the chair. Now the road. I have to tell you about the road, or none of the rest of it means anything. It was the year 2009. I was 27, a first lieutenant, which is a rank that thinks it knows things and does not. We were a convoy on a road we had driven 100 times, and the 101st time the road came apart. I'm not going to give you the whole of it. It is not a story for entertainment, and I will not turn it into one. Here is what you need. There was a blast. My vehicle was disabled. There was smoke, and there was fire starting where fire should not start. And there was a great deal of noise that turned the world into a place with no edges. And I was pinned, and I was 27, and I froze. I want to be honest about that part, because everyone leaves it out of their own story, and I will not leave it out of mine. I froze. There was a moment where I did not do the next thing, because I could not find the next thing, because fear had taken the map. And Sergeant First Class Roy Talley came back for me. He was clear. That is the part I have never been able to put down. He was out, he was in cover, he was going to live, and he turned around and came back into the thing that everyone else was trying to get out of, because I was still in it. He got a hand on me, he got the door, he got me out, and he got me down, and he covered me with his own body and his own weapons until it was over. And at some point in the middle of it, with everything coming apart around us, he put his mouth close to my ear, and he said the sentence I have carried for 17 years. "On your feet, Lieutenant. Not today. Not on my watch." Not today. Not on my watch. He decided, that day, on a road, that I was not going to die. And then he spent no time at all letting me thank him for it. That was Roy. He handed you your life back and then acted faintly annoyed that you had nearly misplaced it. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later with a burn on one arm and a concussion and the specific hollow feeling of a person who has been given something back that they did not get to earn. I did not remember most of the end of it. The mind does that, folds the worst part away, and I have never gone looking for it. What I remember is waking up and not knowing yet whether everyone had made it, and being afraid to ask, the way you are afraid to open a letter you already know the shape of. Roy came to see me before they moved me. He should not have. He had his own scrapes, and there was plenty for a senior sergeant to be doing in the days after a thing like that. And he came anyway, and he stood at the foot of the bed with his cover in his hands, and he did not do any of the things people do at a hospital bed. He did not tell me it was going to be all right. He did not tell me I had done fine, because I had not. And he was not a man who would insult you with a kindness that was not true. He just stood there for a while, and then he said the thing that started the next 17 years. He said, "You froze." He said it flat, no cruelty in it, the way you read a range card. Then he said, "Everybody freezes once. The good ones freeze once and spend the rest of it making sure the freeze does not get anybody killed. You're going to be one of the good ones, Lieutenant, because I did not carry you out of that truck to watch you quit. So you are not going to quit." And then he put his cover on and he left, and that was the entire conversation, and it rebuilt me from the foundation up. I wrote his citation from that bed. With a hand that still shook, I wrote the words that earned him the Silver Star, and I made them as true and as plain as I could, and they were not enough, because words are never the size of the thing. And in the 17 years after, I did the other work, the real work, the letters, the holidays, the phone calls on the bad anniversaries, his and mine both, because we shared a road and a date, and the particular arithmetic of people who were there, the standing up at his retirement and telling a room full of people what he had done while he stared at his shoes and wished I would stop. He came back for me. That is the whole sentence. Everything I have done since, every rank, every command, every soldier I have tried to be worth being trusted with, is the footnote to that one sentence. I have spent 17 years being the officer that Roy Talley refused to let die in the back of a burning truck. I want to tell you who he was, because a colonel decided he could police a funeral without knowing, and I do not want you to make the same mistake he did. I do not want you to see a folded flag and a printed program and a word like Master Sergeant and think you have the measure of the man. You do not. Almost no one did. That was rather the point of him. Roy Talley was not a big man. People expected a big man, from the story, and got a wiry one. 5'8" in boots, with forearms like cable and a face that had decided sometime in the 1980s to stop being surprised by anything. He had a way of standing at the back of a room that made the back of the room the front of it. He did not raise his voice. In 17 years, I heard him yell exactly twice, and both times it was to save a life, and both times it worked. The rest of the time, he ran on something quieter and more frightening, which was the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was for. He was for other people. That is the plainest way I can say it. He was one of those rare soldiers who had burned off almost all of the self somewhere along the way and had left mostly duty behind, and it made him hard to buy and impossible to scare, and the best teacher I have ever had. After the road, when I could have quietly let my career drift toward the safe jobs, the way frightened people do, he would not let me. He did not lecture me about it. He just kept showing up. He would find reasons to put me back out front. He would hand me the hard tasking and then stand where I could see him, not helping, just there, until I did the thing I was afraid of. He moved my line for me over and over, the way he told his young sergeants to, until the officer who froze on a road had been sanded down into someone who could be trusted with a company, and then a battalion, and then other people's frightened children. He did not do it because he liked me. I asked him once, years later, over bad coffee, why he had bothered. He looked at me like I had asked why water was wet. He said, "That is the job, ma'am." He never called me by my first name. Not once, in all the years. Even after we were friends, even after I outranked half the men who had once outranked him. It was always ma'am, or colonel, later. He believed in the thing more than he believed in the people, and he believed in the people plenty. He retired in 2019. I flew in for it, and I stood up at his ceremony and told the room what he had done on a road in 2009 in plain language, while he sat in the front row and stared at his boots and, I could see, wished very much that I would sit down. He hated it. He told me afterward that I had made too much of it. I told him that was going to keep happening for the rest of his life, and he had better get used to it. He did not. He never got used to being thanked. Men who are actually built the way he was built almost never do. The thanks embarrasses them, because in their own heads, they were only ever doing the job. And the job does not need thanking. The job is just what you do because someone has to, and it might as well be you. He got sick in the winter of 2025. It was the slow, unfair kind, the kind that takes a hard man apart in pieces over months and makes him watch. I went out when I could. I sat by the bed, and I let him boss me around about things that did not matter, because bossing people around about small things was how he stayed himself, and I was not going to take that from him too. Near the end, on the phone, his voice already going thin, he said the last thing he ever said to me that was really him, before the medicine took the edges off the days. He said, "You turned out all right, Colonel," which, from Roy Talley, was the same as another man renting a billboard. I told him he had had something to do with that. He told me not to make a fuss. That was the man. That was the name on the casket that a colonel in good dress blues had never bothered to learn before he decided who got to grieve him. Roy Talley, who came back for a frozen lieutenant on a road and then spent 17 more years quietly refusing to let her be less than she could be, and who would have found this whole story unbearable, and would have told me, if he could, to stop telling it and go do something useful. And a colonel in good dress blues had just told me to go sit in the back. The sergeant of the guard knew me. I watched it happen. I have spent a career watching faces, and his was not hard to read once it started. He looked at me the way you look at a person you cannot place. And then he placed me, and the placing hit him like a small, cold wave. I found out later how he knew. His name was Sergeant First Class André Cormier. He was mine. Not close to me, not a soldier I would have recognized on the street, but mine in the way that matters. He was in my battalion. 8 months earlier, I had sat across a desk from him and signed his re-enlistment paperwork and shaken his hand and said the short, true thing you say to a soldier who has decided to stay. He remembered that. Soldiers remember the officer who signed for them. And now he was standing watch over a casket 1,000 miles from home, and the woman a colonel had just called sweetheart and told to move to the back was his own battalion commander in a dark civilian suit in the front row, saying nothing. I saw him do the arithmetic. Rank he could not see because I had left it at home. A face he could not forget because I had signed his life over to 4 more years. The two things met behind his eyes, and I watched his spine change. He said something to the 2 soldiers nearest him. I could not hear it. I read enough of it off his mouth and the way the detail tightened. Later he told me what it was. He had said low without moving his head, 3 words. "That is Colonel Dawson," and then one more. "Eyes." The detail did not turn to me, not yet. That is not how a good detail works. But something moved through them, the way a current moves through still water, a tightening and a tension. Discipline has a sound even when it is silent, and the room did not know it, but the temperature at the front of that chapel had just changed. Colonel Whitcomb did not feel it. That was the thing about him. He had spent so long being the most important man in every room that he had lost the ability to feel a room stop being his. He read my silence as guilt. Men like him always do. A woman who does not fight back must be a woman who knows she is caught. He straightened, satisfied, and then he decided that satisfied was not enough. He wanted me gone before the ceremony started. He wanted the seat empty and the mistake erased, and the morning back on the rails he had laid for it. He bent down again. Lower this time. His voice dropped to the hiss men use when they want to be cruel and deniable at the same time. Do not embarrass yourself, he said. It is a funeral. Get up quietly and go to the back before someone has to make you. He lifted one hand and made a small gesture toward the side of the room where a young officer was standing near the wall, an usher, a lieutenant with nothing to do and now something to do. The lieutenant started toward us. Here is where the squeeze was. I want you to sit in it with me for a second, because it is the whole moral center of the day. I had, in that moment, 2 easy roads and no good one. The first easy road was to obey, to get up, to make myself small, to carry my grief to the back of the room and let a man who had never met Roy Talley preside over the front of his funeral. 17 years of being the officer Roy saved, and I could have thrown it away in one quiet, obedient walk to the back. And a part of me, the old part, the part that froze on a road once, wanted to, because obeying is easy and a scene is hard. The second easy road was to end him. I had that too. I could have stood up to my full height and said my rank and my name and watched this colonel understand in front of the whole chapel that he had just ordered a battalion commander to the back of a room. It would have taken one sentence. It would have felt for about 4 seconds like justice. But it was Roy's funeral, and I was not going to stand over that casket and make the mourning about my rank. I was not going to let Roy Talley's honors become a stage for me to be right on. He had spent his whole life making sure the moment belonged to the mission and not to the man, and I was not going to dishonor him by making his last formation about a colonel and a chair. So I took the hard road, which is the third one, the one that is not easy at all. I did nothing. I let it be. I want to be honest about how hard that is, because people say do nothing as if it were the coward's option. And it is not. Not when you are holding a full and rightful case in your 2 hands and choosing not to open it. Every instinct I have trained over 22 years is to act, to take the situation by the collar and put it right. That is the whole reflex of command. And it is a good reflex, and it is exactly the wrong one in a chapel over a casket. Doing nothing, deliberately, while a man humiliates you in public and you hold the power to end him and you decline, is not weakness. It is the most expensive thing I did all day. It cost me more than a sentence would have. A sentence would have been cheap and satisfying, and it would have made Roy's funeral about me. And the price of not saying it was standing there and taking the small, comfortable laughter of a room that had me wrong, and letting it land, and not defending myself, and trusting the day to something other than my own voice. I could do it because Roy had taught me a version of it. He was the most powerful non-commissioned officer I ever knew, and he spent most of that power holding it in reserve. He knew that the loudest correction is usually the weakest, that a leader who has to prove he is in charge is telling you he is not sure, that the strongest thing in most rooms is the person who could speak and chooses the moment instead. I had watched him do it for 17 years. Now I did it for him. I set my hands flat on the program. I turned my eyes to the front, to the casket, to the flag folded tight in a soldier's white gloves. And I decided to let the honor speak and to keep my own mouth shut and to trust the day to Roy, the way he had once trusted a road to me and been let down and come back anyway. The usher lieutenant reached the end of my pew. He looked at me. He looked at Colonel Whitcomb. He opened his mouth to say the thing he had been sent to say. I looked up at Whitcomb once, and I gave him the only sentence I gave him in that whole exchange, and I said it quietly, so he had to stop and hear it. I will move, I said, if his widow asks me to. She is the only person in this room with the standing to ask. It stopped him for a second. It was not a defense. It was not a threat. It did not give him anything to push against. It just quietly moved the authority in the room from him, where he thought it was, to Ruth Talley, where it actually was. And for a half-second, I saw him try to find his footing and fail. And in that half-second, at the front of the chapel, Sergeant First Class André Cormier stepped off his post. A sergeant of the guard does not leave his post. It is one of the fixed things. The watch over the fallen is not a job you step away from because something in the room has upset you. Cormier knew that better than I did, and he stepped off anyway, and I understood, watching him, exactly what it cost him to do it, and exactly what it meant that he had decided it was worth the cost. He came up the center aisle. Slow, measured. The way you move in dress blues when every eye is on you and you have decided not to hurry for any of them. His boots were quiet on the chapel floor. The usher lieutenant saw him coming and forgot whatever he had been about to say. Colonel Whitcomb saw him coming and did not yet understand. Cormier stopped in front of my pew. He came to a halt the way they teach it, heels together. And for a moment he just looked at me, and I looked at him, and there was 17 years of an army in that look. The whole strange family of it, the thing that lets a sergeant 1,000 miles from home recognize the officer who signed for him and know, without being told, exactly what a colonel had just done. Then he raised his hand and he saluted me. It was slow. It was not the quick salute of a hallway. It was the salute you give at a graveside, the one that has weight in it, the one that takes its time on the way up and holds at the top. White glove at the brow, eyes level on mine, and he held it. The 2 soldiers he had left at the casket squared themselves to me. Not a word passed. The detail simply turned its discipline in my direction, and the room felt it. Finally, all of it at once, the way a room does when it realizes it has been watching the wrong thing. And at the side of the chapel, in the second row of the section reserved for the people who mattered, a man in dress blues with a star on each shoulder stood up. I had not seen him come in. Brigadier General Paul Mercer. He was the presiding officer, the senior man there to render the honors of the service to a retired master sergeant he had known. He rose from his seat without hurry, and he did not look at me. He looked at Colonel Whitcomb, and he waited. I watched Colonel Whitcomb understand. It came apart on his face the way these things come apart, in stages, floor by floor. First he looked at Cormier, holding a salute to a woman in a civilian suit, and could not make it fit. Then he followed the salute to me, and for the first time in the entire encounter he actually looked at me, at my face, which he had not once done. Because a woman you have decided is a fraud does not have a face. She only has the mistake you have caught her in. Now he looked, and then he saw the general on his feet, waiting for him, and the detail turned toward my pew, and the whole architecture of his certainty came down at once. He had decided who I was in 4 seconds. The guard corrected him without a single word to waste on it. His hands did not know what to do. He had them half raised, still in the shape of the gesture he had been making toward the usher, and now the gesture had nowhere to go, and neither did he. His mouth opened. Nothing came out that was the right size, because there was nothing the right size, and some part of him, the part that had spent a career reading rooms, even if he had lost the habit that morning, knew it. I returned Cormier's salute. I am retired of nothing. I was in a civilian suit, and every rule of protocol says a salute is a thing exchanged between uniforms. I returned it anyway. Some salutes are not about the regulation. He had crossed a chapel and left the watch over the dead to render honors to a soldier the room had tried to send to the back, and I was not going to leave his hand hanging in the air over a technicality. I brought my hand up, and I held it, and I gave it back to him, and for a moment the 2 of us just held it there, an officer in a dark suit and a sergeant in dress blues, over a folded program with a dead man's name on it. "Ma'am," Cormier said when we had both brought our hands down. His voice was low, and it did not shake, though I could see what it cost to keep it from shaking. "On behalf of the detail, it is an honor to have you here. You should be exactly where you are." That was the thing that silenced the colonel, not my rank, which was never spoken, not the general, who had not yet said a word. A 29-year-old sergeant of the guard crossing a room he was not allowed to leave to tell a grieving woman that she was exactly where she belonged. That was what took the whole room away from Colonel Whitcomb and did not give it back. Ruth Talley, 2 seats down, made a small sound into her handkerchief. It was not quite a laugh, and it was not quite a sob. It was the sound of a widow watching her husband's army, the actual living thing of it, do in 1 silent minute what she had wanted done and had been too gracious to ask for. General Mercer did not make a scene. Men who actually have the authority rarely need to. He crossed to the aisle, unhurried, and he stopped beside Colonel Whitcomb, and he did not raise his voice. I was close enough to hear it. He said 4 words first, and then a few more. "Colonel, sit down." A pause. "We will talk after." That was all. He did not dress him down in front of the mourners. He did not say my name, or my rank, or explain to Whitcomb the size of what he had done. He simply removed him from the standing world of the ceremony and set the appointment for later. And the later was in his voice, cold and certain, and Whitcomb heard it. Whatever color had been in his face went out of it. He sat down. He found a seat at the end of a row, not the one he had come from, and he sat in it very small, and he did not look at me again for the rest of the service, because he could not. I did not need him broken in front of Roy. I want to be clear about that, because I have turned it over many times since. There was a version of that morning where I made him pay in full, publicly, and the room would have let me, and it would have been earned. I did not want it. Standing over Roy Talley's casket, the appetite for it simply was not in me. His own stars would carry that now. General Mercer would have a conversation with a colonel in a quiet office, and a report would be written, and the machinery that handles these things would handle it, and none of it needed to happen over the flag while a widow watched. I had spent a career learning that the loudest justice is usually the smallest. The real kind is quiet, and it arrives later, and it does not need an audience. So the ceremony went on, the way it is supposed to, and I let it be the only thing in the room. The detail returned to its work. Cormier went back to his post, and his face was formal again, and only the set of his shoulders was different. A fraction straighter, a man who had done a hard right thing and would carry it well. The chaplain spoke. A friend spoke. Then it was time for the honors, and the honors are the same for a retired master sergeant as for anyone the country decides to keep, and they are the same because that sameness is the whole promise. Outside, on the green, the firing party came to the ready. 7 rifles, 3 volleys. The sound of it went across the grass and came back off the low brick buildings, and each time it cracked, I felt it in my sternum, the way I always have, the way I did on a road once. 21, if you count them, though no one counts them because you are not supposed to be counting, you are supposed to be standing there letting it happen to you. I have stood at a lot of these. It is one of the things they do not tell you about the job when you are young, that a career of any length means a certain number of these mornings, the folding chairs and the green and the volleys, and that you never get used to them and are not supposed to. I have buried soldiers I commanded. I have handed flags to mothers who could not look at me. Every time, the same right, the same words, the same triangle of cloth, and every time it does exactly what it is built to do, which is take a loss, too large to hold, and give it a shape that a human being can carry out of the room. That is what the honors are. They are not decoration. They are a set of hands the country puts under a grief so that the family does not have to hold the whole weight of it standing up. Then the bugler. One soldier, alone, at a distance, the way it is done, and the notes of it came slow across the green. 24 notes, the oldest and simplest and most unbearable 24 notes there are. And I stood at attention in a civilian suit with the rest of them, and I let it take me apart the way it is designed to. There is no discipline that holds against taps. There is not supposed to be. I stood there and I let the water come down my face, and I did not wipe it, because there is no shame in it. Because a man had come back for me on a road and I was burying him, and the least I could do was not pretend it did not cost me anything. I looked at the mourners while it played. I did not mean to. But my eyes went across the rows, and I saw what the room had become in the last half hour. Whitcomb was at the end of a row, small, staring at the middle distance, a man who had come to a funeral to be important, and had been made to understand that he was not, and everyone else had turned, in the quiet way people turn, toward the front, toward the widow, toward the woman a sergeant of the guard had saluted, and no one was looking at the colonel at all. The room had voted, without a word, without a show of hands. That is how it actually happens, the turning. Not with a scene. With a slow reallocation of everyone's attention toward the truth. Once the truth has been allowed to stand up on its own. And then the flag. They lifted it from the casket first, 2 soldiers taking it up and drawing it taut, holding it level and waist high, a rectangle of color stretched flat between them over the man it had covered. Then the folding, the way they fold it, the slow triangles begun at the striped end, the corner brought up to the edge and turned again. 13 folds in all, each one pressed sharp with a white glove before the next begins. It takes longer than you think it should, and it is supposed to. There is no hurrying it. 2 soldiers and a whole silence and a flag becoming, fold by fold, a tight blue triangle with nothing but the stars showing, the field of stars, which is the only part left visible when it is done on purpose, so that the last thing the family holds is the union of it and not the stripes. I watched the sergeant who did the folding tuck the last edge in, the way they do, so that no red shows at all, and I knew without being told that somewhere in the folds, 3 spent rifle casings had been placed, 1 for each volley, the old meaning of them, duty, honor, country, sealed into the cloth where the family will find them years later, going through a drawer and have to sit down. Cormier carried it. Of course he did. He took the folded triangle in both white gloves and he turned and he carried it to Ruth, slow, level, held against his chest, and he knelt in front of her on one knee so that the flag came to her at the height of her own hands and not down from above, because you do not hand it down to them, you bring it up to them. That is the whole grammar of it. And he said the words, the old worn words, on behalf of a grateful nation and a proud army, and Ruth took the flag the way you take a thing that is the wrong shape to hold, that no arms were ever built for, and she held it anyway. And then, with the flag in her lap, Ruth Talley reached over, without looking, and she found my hand, and she held it, in front of the whole room, in the front row, where she had put me, where I belonged. I sat with that for a long time after, when it was over. The chapel emptied slowly, the way they do, people not quite ready to go back to a world where the thing had happened. And some of them came to me on the way out. That was the part I had not expected. A few of the people who had chuckled earlier, in the comfortable way, when a colonel corrected a mistake that was not a mistake, came up to me as they filed past, and they did not quite know what to say, and they said it anyway. An older man who had served with Roy in the 90s took my hand and said he was glad I had come, and that Roy had talked about me, which I had not known, and which undid me a little. A young woman, a niece maybe, said she was sorry, and did not say what for, and did not need to. None of them mentioned the colonel. You do not at a funeral. But I understood what the small procession of them was. It was the room finishing its turn. It was people who had been briefly on the wrong side of a thing, coming quietly to stand on the right side of it before they went home. I received each of them the way Roy would have wanted, which is to say I let them off the hook, because holding people on hooks was never what any of it was for. I stayed in my seat until most of them had gone, and then I got up and I stood for a while by the folded chairs at the side of the room, the program still in my hand, and I let the quiet be quiet. I will tell you the honest thing, because the honest thing is the reason this is worth telling. Being recognized felt thin. I had somewhere in me imagined that a moment like that would fill something. The doubter corrected. The room turned right side up. The salute, the general, the widow's hand, and it did not fill anything. It could not. A salute does not bring a man back off a road. The honors did not lighten the debt by a single ounce. All of it, the whole turning of that room, moved a colonel from wrong to understanding and left me exactly where I have been for 17 years, which is alive because someone else decided I would be, and missing him. Cormier found me by the chairs. He had taken off his white gloves. Without them, he looked younger, closer to the 29 he was. He stood in front of me and he did the things soldiers do, which is speak plainly once the formation is over. "I knew you the second you sat down, ma'am," he said. "I want you to know that. I am sorry it took me a minute to move. I should not have needed a minute." "You left your post," I said. "For a salute, in front of a general. That was not a small thing you did, Sergeant." "It was the right thing." "It was," I said. "And it was still not a small thing. Do not let anyone teach you those are the same." He almost smiled. He did not, because you do not, at a funeral, but it was there and then it was gone. "There is a thing Roy used to say," I told him. To young sergeants who hesitated, he never yelled about the hesitation. He said the hesitation was information. He said it told you exactly where your training stopped and your fear started, and that a smart soldier writes that line down and then spends the rest of his career moving it. You hesitated for a minute today, and then you crossed a room and left your post to do a hard right thing in front of a general. You already moved the line, Sergeant. Roy would have had no complaints, and Roy had complaints about everything." Cormier looked down at the gloves in his hand. "You knew him well, ma'am." "He pulled me out of a truck in 2009, I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud all day. "That is why I was in your front row. That is what the colonel decided I had not earned." Cormier was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then I am even more glad I moved, ma'am." And he came to attention, and I let him, and he walked back to help his detail case the colors, a young man who had learned something that morning that no school teaches. I watched them work. 3 young soldiers cleaning up after a rite as old as the country, cased brass and folded stands, quiet and unhurried, nobody watching them now that the crowd was gone. And I thought about the chain of it. Somebody had made Cormier into a man who would leave his post to do a hard right thing, some sergeant of his, hard and quiet, who had a sergeant of his own, running back and back through every non-commissioned officer who ever refused to let the people around him be smaller than they could be, all the way back past Roy and past whoever made Roy. It is the real army, that chain, not the one on the organizational charts. The invisible one, passed hand to hand, person to person, the whole long inheritance of people deciding that other people were worth coming back for. I had walked into that chapel, believing I had lost my last link to it when Roy died. I was wrong. It had been standing at the casket in white gloves the whole time, and it had turned toward me the moment it counted, because that is what it is built to do, and because a version of Roy was in that young man, whether either of them ever knew it or not. That is the thing they cannot take from you at any counter or in any pew. Not the medals, not the seat, the chain. Once you are in it, you are in it, and no stranger's certainty can put you out of it, because the people who are also in it will always know you on sight. Shh. I did not speak to Colonel Whitcomb again that day. I want to tell you what happened to him, because it matters to how this ends, and because it is not what the loud version of the story would want. General Mercer found me in the parking lot afterward. He was an old friend of Roy's, it turned out, from a life 2 wars back, which was why he had come to preside. He shook my hand, and he held it a second longer than a handshake, the way people do when they are deciding whether to say a thing. "I know who you are, Colonel Dawson," he said. I knew before the sergeant moved. I was going to give it another 30 seconds to see if Whitcomb would find it on his own. He paused. "He would not have." "No," I said. "He would not have." "He is going to want to apologize to you," Mercer said. "He is going to want it badly, because men like him need the apology more than you need to hear it. It fixes something in them." "What do you want me to do with him?" I thought about it. I thought about it standing in a parking lot in a dark suit with a folded program in my hand and a man in the ground who had come back for me. Here is what I had learned, and it is the whole of what I have to give you. There is a difference between mercy and letting a thing go. They look alike from the outside, and they are not the same at all. Letting it go means it costs no one anything and changes nothing. Mercy means you decline to take the last measure of what you are owed, on purpose, for a reason, while making very sure the thing still lands where it needs to land. I did not want Whitcomb ended. I did want him changed. Those are different jobs, and they require different tools. I do not want him crushed, I told Mercer. I do not want a formal complaint, and I do not want his career for this. Crushing him does not teach him anything, and it does not do a thing for Roy. I paused, but I wanted to cost him the right thing. So here is what I would ask. Do not let him apologize to me. He has not earned the relief of it, and I have no use for it. Instead, tell him to go and learn who Roy Talley was. The whole of it. The road in 2009, the citation, all of it. Make him read the name on the casket he was policing until he understands exactly whose funeral he tried to run me out of. That is the apology I will accept, and he will make it to Roy, not to me. And Roy is the only one in this who is owed it. Mercer looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and something in his face settled. "You lead the way he did," he said. "You know that. He would be unbearable about it right now if he could hear me say it." "He would," I said. "He would tell you I got lucky and to stop making a fuss." Mercer laughed once quietly, the way you are allowed to at the edge of a funeral, and he said he would handle Whitcomb, and I believed him, because a general who waits 30 seconds to see if a man will find the right thing on his own is a general who will make very sure that man finds it eventually. He called me a week later to close the loop. He is that kind of officer. He told me he had sat Whitcomb down and given him the assignment in those words, learn the name on the casket, and that Whitcomb had asked at the end of it what else he could do. And Mercer had told him the honest thing, that there was nothing else, that the not doing it again was the floor, the least a person could manage, and that the actual work was to become the kind of officer who looks at the person in front of him before he decides who they are. I could not have said it better. It is why he wears the stars. And I got to go home. I kept my promise to Ruth. I stayed the extra day. I sat in her kitchen, and I let her tell me Roy's stories I had heard a dozen times, and I laughed at the parts I always laugh at. And when she cried, I did not do anything clever. I just stayed, because staying is most of it in the end. Before I left, she pressed a thing into my hands. It was the folded program from the service, the one with his name on the front that I had read 4 times before a colonel leaned over me. She had written on the inside of it, in a careful old hand, "You were his. Do not forget it." As if I could. I flew home the next morning. I had a window seat, and I did not read, and I did not sleep. I watched the country go by underneath, the whole enormous quilt of it, all the towns full of people who would never know Roy Talley's name, and were safer for a lifetime of men like him they would never hear about. And I thought about how that was the deal he had signed up for, the anonymity of it, the being for other people right up to the end and past it. He would have been fine with the colonel, is the thing. If he could have seen the whole morning, the lean and the laughter and the salute and the general, he would not have cared about any of the parts that were about me. He would have wanted to know whether the detail was squared away. He would have asked whether the young sergeant got chewed out for leaving his post. And when I told him no, that the young sergeant had done exactly right, he would have grunted, which was the highest grade he gave. I put the uniform back on the day after that, the oak leaf and the name over the pocket and the whole rearranging authority of it, and I stood in front of my battalion, some of them Cormier's friends, and I did the job because that is what you do, because a man once decided on a road that I was going to be alive to do it. I set the program on the shelf in my quarters where I would see it every morning. Next to it, I keep the one photograph I have of Roy that he did not manage to scowl his way out of. A man in field gear squinting at a camera he did not want pointed at him. The program and the photograph, side by side, the debt and the reason for it. I went back to the grave alone before I flew out. Late in the day, after the crowd was gone and the tent was down, and it was just the fresh ground and the low light. I did not say much. I am not a person who talks to graves. I stood there for a while, with my hands in the pockets of a plain dark suit at the foot of a soldier who came back for me on a road, and I let the day settle. I thought about the colonel while I stood there, because the mind does what it does. I thought about how close I had come to walking to the back, how the old reflex, the one that froze on a road when I was 27, was still in me at 44, still whispering that a scene was worse than an injustice, still ready to hand a stranger my seat to keep the room comfortable. Roy had spent 17 years sanding that reflex down, and it was still there. That is the honest report. It does not leave. You just get better at not obeying it, and you get better at it because someone once refused to let you be less than you were, and because you would be ashamed to waste what they gave you by going quietly to the back of a room they died to put you in the front of. And I thought about the salute. Cormier crossing a chapel he was not allowed to leave. I have led soldiers for 22 years, and I can tell you that you do not order a thing like that. You cannot. It is not in any manual. A young sergeant either has it in him to leave the watch over the dead to render honors to a woman the room is trying to send to the back, or he does not, and no order I have ever written could put it there. He had it in him. Somebody built that into him, some sergeant of his own, the way Roy built things into me. The long, invisible chain of it running back through every hard, quiet, non-commissioned officer who ever refused to let the people around him be smaller than they could be. I had walked into that chapel thinking I was alone in my grief, and I had been wrong. The thing Roy was a part of had been standing in the room the whole time, in dress blues, waiting to turn toward me the moment it counted. A letter reached me a few weeks later, forwarded through my battalion from Cormier. It was short and it was careful, the way a sergeant writes to an officer. He thanked me, which he did not need to do. And at the end he wrote one line that I have kept. He wrote, "I hope when I'm old, some lieutenant I was hard on flies across the country to sit in my front row." That was the whole thing. That is the only immortality any of us actually get, and it is enough, and Roy Talley had earned more of it than any man I have ever known. I have thought a great deal, since that morning, about the 2 easy roads and the hard one, about the version of me that would have gotten up and walked to the back, and the version that would have stood up and ended a colonel with one sentence, and the version that actually happened, which did neither, and just sat there and let the truth take its time. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, because I suspect you have been leaned over in a room of your own. Maybe it was not a chapel. Maybe no one wore dress blues. But someone looked at you for less than a second and decided you did not belong where you were standing. In the front row, at the table, in the room, in the grief. And they said so, out loud, with that comfortable certainty that does not bother to check itself. And you felt the 2 easy roads open up under you, the road where you make yourself small and go to the back, because obeying is easy and a scene is hard. and the road where you burned the whole thing down to prove you had every right to be there. I want to tell you what I learned in a chapel with a folded flag in a soldier's white gloves. You do not have to take either road. You do not have to make yourself small. Whatever you carried to get into that room, whatever it cost you, the road you walked, the people who came back for you, none of that gets smaller because a stranger could not see it. A person who has decided who you are in half a second has told you everything about the quality of their attention and nothing at all about you. Their certainty is not evidence. It is just noise, and you do not owe your seat to the loudest person who doubted your right to it. But you also do not have to prove it to them. This is the part that took me longest, and it is the part I most want you to have. The instinct, when someone tells you that you do not belong, is to spend your whole self proving that you do. To pour the road and the fire and the debt out on the table between you, to make them see, to win. Do not. The people who need you to perform your worth before they will believe it are exactly the people who have not earned the performance. Your deepest things are not a card you play to change a stranger's mind. Keep them. Carry them quietly. Sit down in the seat your whole life earned and let the truth do what the truth does, which is arrive, in its own time, from a direction the loud person never thought to watch. Because here's the thing I know now that I did not fully believe before that morning. The people who actually know will always turn toward you. It may not be a sergeant of the guard crossing a chapel. It may be quieter than that and slower, and it may come long after you have stopped waiting for it. But somewhere in the room, or in your life, there is someone who sees the real thing, and when it counts, they turn, they stand, they cross the floor, they find your hand in the front row and hold it where everyone can see. And the loud man who told you to go to the back finds that the room has quietly moved away from him and does not come back, and he did that to himself with his own certainty while you simply sat still and let it happen. It will not always be as clean as a sergeant of the guard crossing a chapel. I had the good fortune that morning of a turning I could see, a salute I could point to, a moment the whole room felt at once. Most of the time it is quieter than that and slower than that, and you have to take it more on faith. You sit in your seat and no one crosses the floor, and you go home not sure the truth did anything at all. But it did. It always does. It moves in the people around you a degree at a time, and one day, sometimes years later, you find that the room rearranged itself while you were not looking, and the person who told you that you did not belong is standing alone at the end of a row, and you are exactly where you always were, which is where you earned to be. I keep a folded program on a shelf now, a name on the front of it in a careful old hand on the inside. You were his. Do not forget it. Next to it, a man in field gear scowling at a camera he did not want pointed at him. The debt and the reason for it, side by side, where I see them every morning. If someone has ever leaned over you and told you that you had no place in a room that your whole life earned, hear this. From someone who has been leaned over, do not go to the back, do not burn it down either. Sit down in your seat, keep what is yours, and let the truth take its time. It always turns toward you in the end. Roy taught me that, on a road, a long time ago, when he turned around and came back. The people who know always do.